Welcome back, everyone. I am Cas Piancey. I'm joined as usual by my partner in crime, Mr. Bennett Tomlin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Cas?
I'm good. We're joined by a special guest today, Joey Politano, who does the Apricitas Economics Substack. He is a economic analyst and data journalist. Joey, it's wonderful to have you on. How are you?
It's amazing to be here. Long time listener, first time appearance. But yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, so we wanted to talk to you about the incoming administration and how that is going to possibly affect cryptocurrencies, maybe including some of our favorites like Tether. We know Lutnick is going to be a part of this administration. We touched on that in one of our previous episodes a bit, but I think you probably know a little bit more about all of these people and can inform us a little bit more about what to expect over the next 4 years. So yeah, I don't know how you want to start it. If you want, you can start with Donald Trump, the man himself, and kind of what you expect his cryptocurrency policies to be.
I think if I was going to start, we should wind back like a couple years. I remember right about 3 years ago, I still am, living near DC. I remember going into Union Station in DC like the day after FTX failed. And Union Station is so crazy because they have these giant, LED billboards. And so it was like wall to wall, Sam Bankman-Fried's face on an LED billboard the day after FTX had failed. And then we had known that like this, the Justice Department was going to be going after him and all of this stuff that was going to happen. Before that, there was like a big push in DC to kind of like normalize crypto. They were outsider industry. They were then like regulated. Then you have like, okay, we're doing these big conferences. We're inviting such and such representative. They're trying to like put on a normal face. And the FTX thing just like totally blew all that up. It was like radioactive. And no one wanted to be associated with crypto because association with crypto was indirectly association with FTX, which was, And then fast forward to, this was the moment that they had this realization this year. I was on the Metro, and if you're on the DC Metro, you get very weird ads. It's like half defense contractors, and like you should get an STD check. But I remember going into Capitol South, which is right near Capitol Hill, and seeing like massive wall-to-wall ads from crypto companies. It was all like, it was a collaborative push about like, this is the future of money. And this is 2024. I'm like, what is this? Did I travel back in time to 2021? And that was a moment for me where I was like, okay, they're going to be pushing really hard this election. And they really did.
And so this is something I was excited to talk to you about. I was talking with Cas about this before we got on. I was reading your article from November 10th, 2022, where you were talking about like the failure of FTX, so right around this same era. And there's a line in there. Bankers, regulators, and lawmakers will likely remember FTX's fall when thinking about crypto for the foreseeable future. And at that time, that was very strongly Cas and my stance as well. You can find a whole bunch of me doing long monologues about how I'm like, this might meaningfully change crypto regulation forever because it can't be ignored.
We also had one of our good friends, Elizabeth Lopatto, who is a journalist at The Verge. We had her on, and she was covering the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. And I think part of what I remember during one of our episodes with her, she specifically said that she thought the collapse of FTX was going to be a moment where it takes years and years and years and years for cryptocurrency to come back at all, if it even ever does in America. And I was like, I'm not sure about that, but I guess we'll see. And lo and behold, here we are.
And now we have seen. And so like you're talking about, Bitcoin is at a new all-time high, ads are everywhere, and the crypto industry spent heavily on the last election. Was that like really the driving force that prevented lawmakers, regulators, and stuff like that from dealing with crypto? Was it the crypto industry making it such an election issue, or is there something else you kind of attribute that shift to?
I would say in a broad sense, it's clear like there's a public opinion shift back. This is like why, if you remember, Harris, when she was campaigning, said some like very weird things that were like vaguely pro crypto. You may remember that famous ad where she was like, I'm going to protect, I think it was Latino, like households' wealth by like securing crypto. And that was such a weird moment. But to me, it was like, okay, this is clear in all the polling that they're picking up on this like increased affinity for the stuff again. The second thing is the spending was like a really big issue. And it was both spending directly on like competitive partisan elections and also spending on primaries. I don't want to say, you can't ever say like the money killed this person's, blah, blah. But like Katie Porter, who is
the money killed her campaign.
Katie Porter, who is like very, very vocal crypto critic, had a lot of money spent against her in the California primary. Jamal Bowman, who's like very left-wing crypto guy, had a lot of money spent on him in the primary. And then as you got towards the general election, you had a ton of like, I would say there's one camp of like, there's actually a lot of bipartisan spending on crypto. Most of it was focused on like moderate people in swing states who can't afford to lose voters. And the examples that I would give are the two Democratic senators who won, so Slotkin and Gallego, who are very close races, managed to win states that Harris lost. They did so in part because they had a lot of crypto money backing them in PACs. And what was actually very funny is the day after the election, you saw a lot of people on like crypto Twitter who were like, man, we shouldn't have done this bipartisan nonsense. We should have backed the Republican candidates in every race. Getting the like crypto moderates on the Dem side was a mistake because they may have saved Slotkin and Gallego's seats. Those races were extremely close. But the other thing that was like a really big example to me was there was a PAC that was basically partisan Republican PAC, but even that I feel like is almost giving it too much credit. It was the anti-Sherrod Brown PAC. Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator from Ohio.
Was this Defend American Jobs?
Defend American Jobs, yes. Yep. The most brilliant marketing by those people who came up with that one.
With its Democratic correspondent was Protect Progress, I think, or something like that.
Yes, I have it written down here. I have like a whole, so Protect Progress. So the bipartisan one was called Fair Shake. The Democratic or mostly Democratic one was called Protect Progress. And then the Republican one was called Defend American Jobs. And also to be clear, how has no one picked up Defend American Jobs yet? Like, how is that still on the table that no one had created the Defend American Jobs back? It's been 10 years since it's been united, guys. You gotta pick up the easy
Don't
names.
Hurt Babies PAC or something, right?
Right. But this was almost all spending against Sherrod Brown, who is the chair of the Senate Banking Committee and who is I would say, prominent crypto skeptic, and obviously the man in charge of writing regulation. Like, he's the most prominent congressional lawmaker for regulation. And Ohio is a very Republican state. Brown is a guy who, despite being a Democrat, always ran ahead of Democratic presidents and was able to, hold on in Ohio for so long. And then Moreno, the guy who beat Sherrod Brown, is like, he's a car dealership owner and he founded a crypto company, and he's the exact kind of guy that you would expect a crypto PAC to really love. And that was like a really big victory for them, as they spent, I think, $40 million in that one race. It dwarfs any other race they competed in. It's specifically to target Brown.
The next closest was, I think, the $10 million or so spent against Katie Porter in the primary.
I think one of the Senate races, one of the other Senate races might have come close, but there was like, it was, serious. Yeah. And that was like a message that I think some people in Washington heard very clearly, which is that if you're like a marginal, a crypto PAC can't like unseat Elizabeth Warren. But if you are a swing state senator who's up for election in 2026, they can and will spend a lot of money if you're like not playing ball.
Would it make you feel better to know that there's reporting today that Fair Shake, between the money they didn't spend and the donations they've already got, has $106 million already for the midterms? That doesn't
make me feel better. That actually, Bennett, that might.
That's a lot for one PAC in the midterm elections.
Right. Like, the other thing to be clear here is like, campaign spending can kind of feel like money doesn't matter. Like, there's just tens of billions of dollars being spent. Like, so what does it all matter? That's true at like a presidential level. Trump raises $1 zillion, Harris raises $1 zillion. They spend it against each other and it kind of cancels out. But at like a Senate level, even like that amount of spending can move the needle significantly. And so you can imagine you're Senator Rosen, or imagine you're Senator Ossoff in Georgia, who's up for re-election in 2 years. Georgia's a very swing state. You're like, you're the first Democrat in a long time to have held the seat, and now you got to fight back. Are you a little scared now of like, what if, they run some psycho crypto? What if they run Perdue and Loeffler? We'll get to it. Senator Loeffler was a very big crypto advocate who maybe had some personal reasons for being an advocate that we'll get into. But like, she could possibly run for Senate again. Do you want to be fighting down her and then like a 30 million spending from whatever Fair Shake PAC or whatever? Or do you just say, well, I don't need to take a stance on crypto regulation issues. Let me like move on to other things.
I mean, that sounds pretty pessimistic, but it also sounds totally reasonable to me. Like, I guess that kind of sounds like this is going to now be one of these issues that is, at best for critics and skeptics, not touched anymore, not discussed, as opposed to like you're not going to see, like you're saying, if you're somewhere like Ohio or Florida or Pennsylvania, why bother talking about cryptocurrency at all? Like, it seems like you're asking for problems. If you're going to be like, well, I think that Tether is bad, then why, like, don't just shut your mouth, I
think that's the message that a lot of people are getting, because it's one of those issues where it's very low salience for most people. People, say 60% of people who like dislike crypto, it's just not a thing that they think about on a day-to-day basis. And it's not something that they're like forming their voting opinions on, But there's a like entrenched few percent of people who own a decent amount of crypto assets and have an affinity for the stuff. And then there's this giant pool of money on the other. So like, why go against the giant pool of money?
Right.
And it's like, at some level, like if you're a senator from Nevada, you're going to have like very weird opinions on gambling that have, little to do with your internal logic on what if gambling's good or not, and a lot to do with whether the fact that you're the senator from Nevada. And I think there's going to be like increasing amounts of that too. This was another thing where we'll get into, but like there's a lot of crypto stuff in North Dakota right now.
Sure.
And that's like a very big
Wyoming,
deal.
North
Wyoming
Dakota
is another one, right? So these are very small states that obviously punch way above their weight in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
If you are the senator from North Dakota, do you really want to like bother one of the 4 industries that like your state's economy runs off of? Or are you just gonna...
I don't know if you've heard, like, this is one of the things that I remember someone mentioning either on I think it was on BlueSky, where they said, like, you don't have to like the robber barons or the train barons, from back in history, back in the old days of the late 1800s or mid 1800s. You do not have to hand it to them. Yeah, you don't have to hand it to them, exactly. But one of the things they did was they did create infrastructure and jobs. Like, they might not have been the best jobs in the world. They might have been paying people in company script. They might have been doing all kinds of shady stuff to make a bunch of money, right? However, again, and you do not have to hand it to them, but they were building infrastructure and creating jobs versus you reflect on like these cryptocurrency CEO billionaires, and there's many of them now, who are influencing politics, buying politicians, and all of this stuff. And it's like, so what are you bringing to Texas? Like 11 jobs to Texas or something? Like, what are you bringing to North Dakota? You're billions of dollars to give to a bunch of politicians and nothing else? Like, it's just, to me, it's really depressing in that it's like, okay, so here's this new class of hyper wealthy people who offer absolutely nothing else besides their wealth.
And I think, part of the tough part is like, if you were the Vanderbilt, a lot of your money was tied up in physical infrastructure.
Sure.
So you had, you built a railway line from Albany to Cincinnati. You now are stuck dealing with the people in Albany and Cincinnati because you own that railway line. Mm-hmm. If you're, crypto billionaire, like you're explicitly picking places because they're flexible and you can move to them and blah, blah, blah. Like your wealth is wholly transferable. There's very little physical cost. And even the like data center stuff, which is really big in Texas and North Dakota, like that's very movable. The primary...
And the threat of like it's like the Elon Musk thing too, where he classically, right, this whole idea of like, I hate California, I'm moving to Texas. And it's like, okay, dude, but I can perceive a future where, like what you're talking about, essentially these states are being held hostage almost, right? It's like, oh, you don't like the cryptocurrency stuff? Well, do you want the money for your political campaign or not? Like, I don't know what to say to you because I'm not going to give you the money if you're opposed to us. I'll give it to your opponent. And now But then again, and different things where you can think about taxing them or other stuff where they go like, oh, you're going to raise taxes on the hyper wealthy in North Dakota or something. Well, then I guess I'm just going to fucking leave. And then they do, right? Because all of this money can just be moved around and they can go live in the Bahamas or in the Cayman Islands, and they can transfer it out to wherever the hell they want. And it's not the same. It's exactly what you're talking about, where it's not the same. And I know I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it feels like a crisis in governance and a crisis for America. Truly, it does for me. Not there's 100 other bigger, more important crises that America is facing as well. I don't want to like disregard that, but I am saying that financial problems and the way that Trump and the administration coming in seem to be looking at not just cryptocurrency, but like fraud and other aspects of finance that you know about, and government, where like I see you talk about government infrastructure, you talk about subways, you talk about, basic things where it's like, yeah, if we build this out correctly, you can see how I always talk about Wuhan. Like Wuhan in China didn't have a subway until like 2000 or something. And now it's the 9th most used subway in the world. Why can't we do things like that in America? And it's like, well, because we don't fund the government. We hate the government. And now that's just going to get worse, right?
I think the big story that you could tell of like a lot of industries, and I've thought about this a lot, if you think about like, why is Silicon Valley moving rightward? Or to be very precise here, it's not Silicon Valley because like tech workers are still very left wing. But like, why is Silicon Valley owners and managers moving rightward? And I think it's to do with like this transition from being upstart, small, very chaotic industry to now like we're fully entrenched business interests. The tech companies obviously are different than oil companies, but they're now both in that category of like, we are the largest companies in the world. We're much more focused on like defending what we have than trying to like create the, brand new product that no one's ever seen before. I think you could tell a story of crypto that's like also kind of in that lane where you were like, hey, this was a very anti-government, anti-regulation thing. It got so big that now it became enmeshed with all of these like corporate interests, and specifically like quasi-legal corporate stuff. We're talking about like FTX, we're talking about like Tether, things where you're like, this may technically follow the laws of the Bahamas and how we deal with international trade, but I really feel like this is, missing the point here. And previously you could say, well, now, I wrote a piece, I remember in 2021 talking about this very interesting way where you're like, you could regulate a lot of crypto because the main access points to crypto are large companies that fundamentally are more close to like the Merrill Lynch than they are to like a decentralized platform. And those, centralized actors have won clearly. But now we're in like the opposite, where the centralized actors have won so clearly that now they're in control of like all of the regulations. And we're going to get to like, Trump is a very big crypto guy. Personally, he's made a complete 180. He, during the campaign, launched this weird coin that's not quite a coin, but is like aesthetically crypto, the World Liberty Financial thing. And then Justin Sun just announced that he's putting like 30 million into that.
We love Justin Sun on Crypto Critics. We're huge fans.
He shows up all the time. Where does he keep going?
I literally published a newsletter today about Justin Sun investing in World Liberty Financial, where I might have heavily implied it's a bribe.
I say this stuff facetiously like all the time, but like we made Jimmy Carter like put his peanut farm in a trust, and now it's like, first of all, Trump has this weird adjacent crypto scheme that like regular billionaires are just investing in. Obviously, like
billionaires who specifically are being sued by the SEC buy as much of the token as they plan to sell in total, unlocking millions of dollars in revenue from the thing that Trump otherwise would not have gotten.
Right. And on the flip side of this is, Trump has this main vehicle that's like the majority of his wealth now is Truth Social, which is like the DJT indicator. And I feel like calling it Truth Social is like almost a bit of a misnomer. Like ostensibly it owns Truth Social and that's the business model, but functionally it's just a way to like gamble on the stock market on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The entity. And the Financial Times had reporting on that they were in talks to buy Bakkt, if I'm saying this right, which is a crypto company.
It's backed. I'm not sure.
You know what? I don't respect it enough. I do not regret the error. I do not regret the error. Bakkt, which is a crypto company that's majority owned by Intercontinental Exchange. Kelly Loeffler, who was the former Republican senator to Georgia, who lost the election in 2020. She was the CEO. Her husband is the CEO of Intercontinental Exchange, the company that owns Bakkt.
Right.
And so and you could pull up the stock chart. I think it's up like 150% over the last week or two.
Which is also a little bit wild because whatever the acquisition is going to be, it's going to be some like strange equity for equity deal where the Bakkt equity holders at best are getting like Trump media stock that's going to be hard for them to liquidate. So
it doesn't, I'm not trying to say it makes sense.
Oh, no. I just wanted to yell about that briefly.
Right. Yeah. But it was purely like, okay, this person who donated to Donald Trump and is affiliated with the Republican Party has this vehicle that can earn them a decent amount of money. Donald Trump has this vehicle that earns him a decent amount of money. Like, let's mix those together. And ostensibly, there's like crypto connection in there, in that like Bakkt does crypto stuff, and then they're going to do. If you remember how Elon Musk was talking about like turning X.com into a payments platform, like they're going to turn True Social into a crypto payments platform. Like,
great.
Sure. But this is the man who is like appointing now the replacement head of the SEC, who is the Attorney General, the heads of Commerce and Treasury, which we're going to get into in a second here, all of whom are much more pro-crypto than any of the Biden administration folks were.
I just want to say, like, to me, it's crazy. I think it was a tweet from Brian Armstrong from a couple weeks ago before I had completely exited Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, where Brian Armstrong said something along the lines of like how much money was flowing into Fairshake, whichever crypto pack it was. And he was like, this is so powerful. And then I started reflecting on
politics at work, Mr. Armstrong.
Well, it's so crazy to me that like originally, if you go back, I think you've kind of touched on this, Joey, is like originally the whole concept of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, like this was the concept of decentralizing finance, of making it so no nation state was controlling this currency, that you could move across borders with this money fluidly and not have to, not get called out for it and all this stuff, and not have to deal with banks and this and that. And it's like, that was the powerful part of cryptocurrency. But now the powerful part apparently is when you donate hundreds of millions of dollars to super PACs. Like, sorry, what the fuck are we even doing? Like, how is that? It's just wild to me, but it's now moved past, it's not just super PACs being important and like trying to win over senators and stuff. Now it's like, we're going to have a whole fucking administration and cabinet that loves or at worst doesn't care about cryptocurrency. So yeah, let's get into some of these names like you just started mentioning. Like I don't know, whoever you want to start with, feel free, please.
I think the best place to start is Commerce Secretary.
Yes.
Lutnick is first of all, to be clear here, this is as far as we were the most billionaire filled like cabinet in history. I think if you totaled up the net worth, it's like probably now in the closing 100 billion. Obviously, if you added Elon, who's like shadow president or whatever, goes even higher. But Lutnick is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. He has been a very pro crypto person like from day one, from go, and he's been on this like train of trying to integrate like the cryptocurrency ecosystem into the existing Wall Street ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And he personally has a ton of dealings like with Tether. And this was like the very interesting thing. Tether obviously is in that like quasi-legal gray area. They've been prosecuted by like I'm trying to use my words carefully.
There's a backlog. We've got a playlist.
There's a lot of backlog. There's a lot of Tether lore. But they're not the most sane actor, and they've been, prosecuted by arms of the United States government in the past over things like that, and they've been investigated continually. And then Lutnick is at Commerce is one of the main arms of the U.S. government concerned with like regulating international trade. Lutnick, by the way, like turbo tariff guy, he loves them, so get ready for that one. But then immediately after this, now there's rumors swirling that like Cantor Fitzgerald is trying to set up some sort of very large Bitcoin lending fund with Tether.
Yeah, they've been working on it for the last couple months.
Right. And so this is something that's like should be obvious conflict of interest in some sense of like, here's the cabinet secretary working with this legally dubious organization offshore to for their cumulative monetary gain.
And to be clear, so everyone is aware, Howard Lutnick won't stay the CEO and head of Cantor Fitzgerald when he takes this role, but his son is apparently in line to take over at Cantor Fitzgerald. So the idea that like he won't have any influence is fucking insane. He's totally gonna have total power still.
Do not get me started on multi-billion-dollar family businesses. Whew.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, similar thing of like, ostensibly there is a separation between Donald Trump the man and Donald Trump like the business enterprise and Donald Trump the president. But in practice, it's like there's much less nowadays.
There's barely even any pretext of pretending there's distinctions between those anymore. There was a little bit more of a distinction 8 years ago. Like, people wanted there to be a distinction.
He doesn't want there to be any distinction. Like, they are to him, they're the same. To us, they're the same. I don't think the only time he doesn't want you to conflate the two is during legal proceedings. So
right, but so the example that I would give is like, okay, going back to Loeffler, the Georgia senator. She was CEO of Bakkt, which was like owned by Intercontinental Exchange, where her husband is the CEO. And then when she got appointed to the U.S. Senate, she just like resigned the position. And then if you remember, like immediately did insider trading.
Yeah.
It had to be investigated for the actions that she took in like within seconds of getting to the Senate. And that's part of the reason she lost the election, was because people wrote like that election was Loeffler and Perdue were both like enmeshed in this investigation.
It was insane. I would love, I wish we had covered it more. I don't think we've covered it very much when it was going on, but like, yeah, just the idea that this woman gets appointed essentially to the Senate seat and then immediately does corruption. Like immediately and instantly sits down and does corruption.
It was a little bit like that domino meme, just in terms of how it changed the politics of that state. Like, nominate this random CEO for this few months in the Senate, and oh no.
Right.
One thing leads to another.
Exactly.
I think of the like. Do you remember the David Perdue no wrongdoing, totally exonerated? I think about that all the time.
I don't.
This was so funny. It was one of the PACs in this election, because he was also a part of this investigation. And like I said, the investigation did not turn up criminal insider trading, to be clear, but like, so Purdue
ethical
ran this
lines
ad.
were crossed.
I think I'm right. I think the sanctity of the United States Senate was violated a little bit, whatever remains of that. And
I too agree that the sanctity of the United States Senate has been violated before.
But Perdue ran this ad that was like totally exonerated, no wrongdoing. It's a picture of him like at a farm, like smiling with his kids. It's the most ridiculous. And so people use that all the time as like my not involved in human trafficking shirt. As a lot of people asking questions already answered by my shirt.
Yeah, there does feel like there's a risk of reaching a low information voter there who's like, exonerated of what?
Lutnick is there at Commerce, so we're coming back. The Treasury nom, who was just announced, is Besant. And I think the key part to realize here is there was like kind of a chain. Lutnick wanted to be Treasury because Treasury is like normally the more powerful position. I think Trump personally doesn't like Lutnick, which is really funny. Like, just annoyed with the guy interpersonally.
Right. Yeah, they're apparently having fights, and also Besant and Lutnick are apparently having a lot of fights. But
Trump and Lutnick's egos are too similar for them to get along.
This is going to be a recurring problem for the next 4 years. People. So Besant, who is, as far as Trump world goes, more normal.
Like, the bar is one of the more sane individuals.
Like the bar is in the floor, but he is like. I was happy when he got nominated because he staved off like much worse other outcomes. I'm not endorsing Scott Bennett.
Much worse being Lutnick, basically. Right, the other option was Lutnick. So for what it's worth,
Well, there was other attempts. They were going to do something funky with trying to have like a shadow Fed chair at Treasury. That's an insane plan that they'd come up with because they don't like Jerome Powell anymore, even though you'll remember that Donald Trump is the man who appointed Jerome Powell.
There's so many people.
Famous leftist.
I know how popular it is to hate on the Federal Reserve, and I get it. Like it's a weird shadowy organization. I understand that
it's
that
easy
makes
to
people
hate what you don't understand.
Totally.
Right.
It's easy to have issues with it. I totally get that, but also like the way that they've navigated 2020 on, it's hard for me to point to a bunch of misfires. It's like, well, we're doing pretty all right. So like, why do we hate Jerome Powell right now? Is it just because it's easy and fun?
It's kind of funny because during the Trump administration, you'll remember like Trump was constantly at odds with Powell because Powell was raising interest rates at the time.
Yeah.
And Trump is like wanted interest rates to be lower. So he would just tweet that like it's bad that they're raising interest rates.
Right.
Which you're not supposed to do. That's not the president is not supposed to directly like say where
Try
they
to
think interest
influence
rates
the Federal
should go.
Reserve. Yeah.
Joey, are you suggesting Donald Trump does not believe in a true and independent Federal Reserve?
I'm thinking about it.
He doesn't want one is what he it's not whether he believes it, he doesn't want it.
But what was very funny to me was like when Powell was appointed, that was actually like a break with tradition. You're supposed to, theoretically, both sides of the aisle are just supposed to reappoint the Fed chair unless they've done something real bad, unless there's a like massive, like the economy's in a recession or like they've done, crime. Like and so Trump not renominating Yellen was actually like a big break with tradition. And then Biden renominated Powell to try to keep this chain going. And I think like, there's actually not that much light between Powell and Yellen on the very specific narrow issues of like where interest rates should be. And now Trump's back in office, and the guy that he appointed last time to break traditions with, he's like, now I don't like him anymore. But Bessent, we're going back to Bessent. Bessent staved off. There was a talk of like nominating this guy who is going to probably be Trump's Fed pick to Treasury and having him be like shadow Fed chair when he was Treasury. And Bessent is not going to do that. And so that was what I was thankful for. But Bessent is also a very pro-crypto guy. He's not like overly so, but he's another hedge fund billionaire. He's another guy who's been very early on in the crypto ecosystem. And he, again, sane by Trump world standards, but like very pro-crypto guy. And being at Treasury, you have a lot more control over U.S. policy, especially on like sanctions and stuff. So the Office of Foreign Asset Control is like a big way in which the U.S. government tries to rein in, let's call it non-American actors, people in the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands or Singapore or whatever, who are doing things that we think aren't quite legal. And so sanctions enforcement and like money laundering enforcement, that falls under Treasury. And you have a guy who's like very pro-crypto in that position.
And let's just say pro-offshore money in general. So
right. And Trump is also going to get to nominate someone for SEC.
Yeah. We don't know who that'll be yet, do we?
We don't know who that'll be.
Yeah.
None of the rumors are good.
None of the yeah. I was about to say it's all bad options, so don't get your hopes up.
To be fair, I think Gary Gensler has been very ineffectual. I think that's kind of I think both sides feel that hasn't
and we've
helped
talked
anyone.
about it on here before, but the SEC structurally has some difficulties in terms of becoming an effective regulator.
That's true.
Yes. But I think the like competing influences are now at SEC. The competing influences are Donald Trump owns a massive publicly traded company that has like kind of funky business value that he doesn't want regulated. Elon Musk owns a massive publicly traded company which has at least
private companies
and private companies
and a defense contractor,
and he's a defense contractor, and is personally beefing with the SEC on like a weekly basis.
And is actively violating his settlement terms on a daily basis.
I think about all the time how he's supposed to have a lawyer read all of his tweets.
And he does, presumably, right?
There's someone who's paid to be a lawyer and read all of his tweets.
I believe in the room.
Happens,
sure, yeah.
But I don't believe that
it happens after the fact. So
yes.
when he was pushed on this in the follow-up to the original lawsuit, they admitted like they review it eventually, most of the time, sometimes. And the lawyer will sometimes say things to Elon, and he ignores them most of the time, all of the time.
And then third of all, there are this large crypto lobby that is very mad at Gensler because he took like very moderate steps towards regulating crypto or preventing all cryptocurrencies from like being on the New York Stock Exchange. And so they're going to, like you said, all the names are bad. They're going to replace him with somebody who is much more crypto friendly and much less like enforcement of rules against large publicly traded companies friendly.
Yeah. And this actually extends further than just the cabinet, for what it's worth, because we just had the resignation of Damian Williams, who is at the Southern District of New York, because Trump has already said he's going to appoint Jay Clayton, I believe, to the Southern District of New York. If you're unfamiliar with Jay Clayton,
I mean, with a record like Jay Clayton's, how can you not want him in charge of America's white collar crime prosecutions?
If you're unfamiliar with Jay Clayton, the reason that Bennett is saying this is because not you, Joey. I'm talking to the audience. Jay Clayton was running the SEC, and under his tutelage, if you think Gary Gensler didn't do anything,
they brought one case, the most obvious case in all of crypto, against Ripple, and lost.
Yeah. So if you think Gary was ineffectual,
but fuck it, it's a loss.
Jay Clayton was the most ineffectual. So I think we're going to start seeing like some pretty egregious stuff just get ignored. And it's not just on a cabinet level where you're like deciding policy. Now we're talking about like laws being enforced, which is crazy.
And I will say, okay, I have a whole like It's Always Sunny board drawn up in a notebook. try to remember how everyone is. But like Ripple was, I think, the number 2 or number 3 donor to all of these hacks.
Yes, and they're the one.
A16Z
them and A16Z are the two who've started to contribute to the midterms already.
Oh,
right.
God, I hate A6. Like even hearing A16Z, I just get like they are just the worst. They are the worst.
Yes.
They have all of these guys. Fuck, man. This was another discussion that I wanted us to have at some point, Joey. Is just this idea that. I'm also very pro generally, like YIMBY. I'm like I want things to get built. I want government to make new things. I want infrastructure projects. I want us to use nuclear power. Like let's do all the things. And then when it's like, oh well, us billionaires, we're gonna build a whole new city in the middle of California. How about that? And you're just like, wait, no, not yes to this. Hold on.
Yes, but not you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's frustrating to me that they've like occupied this space because like they're not going to I feel like people have kind of bought this as like, okay, well, Trump sometimes says things that are just blatantly not true, and people have like adopted this style. And the example that I give all the time is on the All In podcast. Jason brought up like, oh, we need more high-skilled immigration in the US. And Trump said like, yeah, anyone who gets a college degree in the US should have an automatic green card. Like, those were the exact words. And I was like, first of all, that would be like the most liberal immigration system of almost any country on the planet. Second of all, like, you were president before, and like, you cut legal immigration. You made it harder. And people on this podcast, you said this knowing that what you did, 4 years ago is the complete opposite. And people on the podcast are like, I don't think they believe him, but they're trying to project this idea that other people should believe him when he says, oh, actually, I care about abundance. Therefore, I think we should have like the best immigration system. And they're not going to fix California high-speed rail. They right. It's bad that it takes so long, but like they also don't have any interest in like fixing the New York City subway. And so I don't know, frustrating that they try to occupy that issue space. And Andreessen in particular. Now we're going off again.
Sorry,
but
I apologize.
When Andreessen's like he wrote that big YIMBY thing, and then he wrote a letter to
build or whatever.
Yeah, he wrote it's time to build, and then he wrote a letter to like the Atherton City Council, being like, you shouldn't allow this like 2-story building.
No buildings over 25 feet. It's going to cast a shadow near the street I sometimes walk on. You can't do that.
For what it's worth, it's not just Mark Andreessen. It's every partner there pretty much is just like the worst kind of individual building the worst kind of shit. Yep. Sorry for that tangent. I'm sorry I took us there. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, Joey.
So nominees and appointees.
Nominees. We got to Besson and Lutnick. Those are the two wagons. But keep in mind, so we talked a bit way earlier about like North Dakota crypto stuff. But Doug Burgum, who's like very tech adjacent former North Dakota governor, is going to be at Interior, and like the purpose of him being at Interior has little to do with crypto, but this is like building this story. Chavez de Remer, who is the perennial election loser who continues to like get appointed to higher and higher positions. She lost the election for a congressional seat in Oregon, and she's now the Secretary of Labor. She was backed by these
definition of failing up, right?
packs.
There you go.
It's very funny if you go and look into her lore. She's lost to the same woman like 3 times. She lost for like an Oregon state Senate race, and then an Oregon like state assembly race, and then now this Oregon congressional race is the same person.
And she keeps getting appointed, and then the appointment ends, and she's like, "Well, time to run again. But I got to run for the next level up. I can't run for the House again. Got to run for Senate now."
And thankfully, I don't think she can win an Oregon Senate race. I think this is the Secretary of Labor to something else. But Kristi Noem, who is the governor of South Dakota, you will learn both the Dakotas very into crypto.
Animal lover,
and she was one of the people who, like, as governor, she vetoed like crypto regulations that a Republican South Dakota, state assembly and Senate passed. Like, this is the level that we're at.
Yeah.
And then, of course, who could forget RFK Jr., HHS, who, thankfully, I don't think HHS does anything related to crypto.
Maybe soon.
Those disasters are going to be totally
soon enough. Let's get all our medical records on the blockchain, folks. It's time. It's finally time.
First of all, we stop CMS from paying for any drugs RFK Jr. doesn't personally believe in. And then we take that money and we send it directly to the strategic Bitcoin
No
reserve.
more Adderall for anyone.
Who
needs Adderall when you can send people to forced labor camps? And that is literally an RFK Jr. position.
Yeah, I know. Well, the ADHD will go away if we take the fluoride out of the water, guys. Don't you understand how this works?
It's so funny to me that, like, the fluoride stuff was, like, the butt of jokes in, like, the 70s already.
I know.
And we're back to that.
It's crazy.
But RFK is, like, also a big crypto guy. He's gone to a ton of their conferences. He claims that his entire net worth is in crypto, and I kind of believe him.
I don't.
The brainworms are talking again.
I don't think RFK Jr. has access to most of his net worth. Like, I think being a Kennedy at this point, he sees an account and he's probably taken money out of that account and put it in crypto.
His allowance.
But I don't think, like, from a legal sense, that's his net worth, you know?
Bennett brought up the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which I hate that I have to verbalize.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Cynthia Loomis has been talking about this. She is a senator from Wyoming. She's been really loud about this.
Anyone's a good faith actor. It's Cynthia Loomis.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And she, for what it's worth, I think part of her pitch here for this strategic Bitcoin reserve, part of her pitch is that we sell off our gold reserves and move it into Bitcoin, which I like.
Those massive American gold reserves.
Yeah, those crazy. Funny enough, we do have, I believe, the largest gold reserves in the world are American. Are they really? I thought we'd been passed up.
I
believe so.
I mean, it's just like vaults at
Fort Knox,
the New York Fed that and Fort Knox that we don't do really anything with.
Oh, we are still.
But we should. I mean, this is so funny because it's like you should sell. Like I remember when Biden sold part of our strategic oil reserve, and it was like, yeah, that lowered gas prices. Like, it was very effective. It's like, yeah, I don't hate the idea of selling some of our strategic gold reserve. What good is it otherwise, right? Like, what do we even need the gold for? Selling some of that is great. Selling it and then immediately taking that money and putting it into Bitcoin is like, what the fuck are we doing? What?
Well, Bitcoin's like gold, but it's digital, Cas.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, no, I didn't know that. Thank you. No, okay, now it makes sense. Yeah.
It's funny because, like, why do normal countries that aren't the United States, like, have foreign currency reserves? It's like, because usually their currency, if you're
because they don't have the dollar.
Right, I was going to say, you don't have the dollar. I'm picking on, like, you could pick on Malawi or something. And it's like, it's tough because there's very little external demand for their currency. So they have to have some reserves. That's both a, like, way to manage the currency and also a way to, like, hedge against risks. If you're in the United States, you don't really need that because if there's a disaster, like, if there's a disaster globally, like, people in Malawi want US dollars. If there's a disaster in the United States, people in the United States want US dollars. So you are the safe asset. Like, you don't need to then hold another, like, gold is riskier than the US dollar.
No, you're going to need the gold bar in an emergency. Don't you understand?
It's so shiny.
I kind of regret taking this, like seriously. I don't think that this is going to happen. Obviously, it's not going to happen by an act of Congress. I can tell you that much. But it's possible, like we just said, Lutnick and Besant are very pro-crypto. It's possible that they could flex some of the Exchange Stabilization Fund is an example of, like, we have these funds at the U.S. that are supposed to be at the discretion of the president and the cabinet in the event of, like, a break glass in place of emergency thing. Like, oh, Congress can't act fast enough. You have this money just in case. it's possible they could like try to flex some of that into crypto. I again regret bringing this up. No one's tried that before, so we don't know what the legal ideas with this are.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what the Supreme Court says.
Oh man. But I think the bigger story is like I fully expect them to be really like to annoyingly talk about this intermittently. I would fully expect Donald Trump to at some point post on Truth Social like we're going to make a strategic Bitcoin reserve and then not like follow it up with anything. But that would like launch the price, you know.
My gut instinct is they're going to look for some kind of Bitcoin that's been seized that realistically like is never going to be returned to anyone else, isn't like reasonably tied into restitution. And they're going to pull whatever tiny Bitcoins they can find that the government has that fit that description and call that the reserve, if you want my guess. I don't think they're actually going to spend much money on it.
I also think one of the dangers
in the couch.
I also think one of the dangers of this is that many of us have been like, yeah, well, fucking Donald Trump won't do the thing that he says he's going to do, and then he does exactly what he said he was going to do. So I like the idea that he's like, yeah, strategic Bitcoin reserve, and all of us are like, he's just being stupid and loud. But like, no, I could definitely see him making this somehow happen. You know,
I think it's the frustration I have is like he'll say something that is directionally correct, like he's going to do that in that direction, and then people like treat you as crazy if he doesn't do exactly what he said. So I'm giving an example just because this was literally yesterday, and this is like my alley. Trump posted that he was going to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico and Canada if they didn't like fix the border and stop fentanyl. And again, poor Justin Trudeau. Like, you know, I feel bad for him. He's not doing anything in this, but like, I don't think he's going to do that because, you know, just automakers would be furious, absolutely devastated if they attempted this. But I do directionally think that he will get in office on his first day as president of the United States. He will sign some sort of trade restriction or tariff on Mexico over immigration. And so it's like, on the one hand, I don't believe that there's doing the 25%. On the other hand, it's ridiculous that like he's going to be the president of the United States. We have to take what he says seriously because he's going to do some portion of it, and it's always like directionally correct. So when they say like, oh, we're going to do a strategic Bitcoin reserve, I think though they're going to try something flashy. I think my point there is like both like it's debasing to have the man behind the Resolute desk be like shilling, you know, shitcoins. Right. Sorry, I'm not used to cursing on podcasts. It's debasing to have him like shilling shitcoins. Secondarily, like to say it's so antithetical to all of what crypto is ostensibly for, that like you're getting bailed out by the taxpayer, you're getting like juiced by, you know, public funds if it happens, or you're advocating for it to happen. Like why as a sitting senator from Wyoming, why are you advocating for the US government to be like gambling money on this? Right. And then from a third point, it's like it's going to be bad because like Elon Musk is going to tweet about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and is going to make the price of Bitcoin go up, and like plausibly there will be people who know about that who will make money from it. And like we have the Department of Government Efficiency thing is like, it's not a department, first of all. That's not how that works. But second of all, it's like the name is entirely there because Elon Musk thinks like Doge is funny, and it's like increased the price of Dogecoin a lot. And now there's a Senate Doge caucus. There's going to be a House Doge caucus led by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I'm like, we're forced to like take some of this stuff seriously. I'm forced to say Senate Doge caucus because that exists now.
And Elon Musk has never been able to explain why his fixer was listed on the board for the Dogecoin Foundation on their website.
It's this stuff where you're like, even if there is you didn't like legally, the Doge thing has not like invested in Bitcoin. It's not told people, it's not told people to invest in Dogecoin. It's like, we all know what you're doing here. And it's just very frustrating. And it's like people are like, there's a lot of it's one thing to be like, there's a lot of corruption, but I think the other tough part is like, there's a lot of people who are just going to like gamble and lose money off this, who are mostly innocent because they think Elon Musk is cool and they think that this is like an easy way to make money. You know, I don't have sympathy for people who are like sophisticated fund managers who lose money on crypto, but I have sympathy for people who are like, haha, Dogecoin, I'm going to put $2,000 in it.
And I do worry about the sports gambling industry seeing how effective the cryptocurrency industry's big pile of money was at making regulating the industry basically impossible in Congress. I don't think it's a great thing that the sports gambling industry just saw that example in the last election.
Or like any of the like Zyn is another one where like that's highly addicting.
Any highly profitable vice industry, really.
Yeah,
right.
Tobacco.
Should you be and tobacco is a much more regulated advertising space, but they're frustrated by that. I was gonna say for now. Yeah. And they're frustrated by that. And like the Trump has like weird regulatory beliefs sometimes. You remember it was his administration that like put some of the first restriction on Juul. But like he flips all the time. He was like pro TikTok ban. Now he's like anti TikTok ban because he's
popular
with the TikTok executives. But it's unclear. And I don't know. I do think it is like from the pure perspective of if you are a rational, imagine like you were totally amoral being and you just cared about getting reelected to the Senate. That was your only goal in life. Like, yeah, you're going to talk down cryptocurrency regulation a ton over the next few years because you saw how effective a lot of this is. And I will say, like, it's becoming the fact that it is a more bipartisan issue. It's like, on the one hand, it's partisan. Like, this is a new president. He's going to be much more pro crypto than the previous president. But on the other hand, it's like one of those issues where seemingly the only people that are like going to be pro crypto regulation are like Elizabeth Warren category. Well, I'm just saying that category of person. Like Warren obviously has a lot of personal beliefs about financial regulation. Like that's her like baby. But I just meant that category of person who is in like a D+20 seat who doesn't actually have to care about like winning re-election because they're going to win re-election because they're popular at home in a very liberal state are going to be the people who care about cryptocurrency regulation. If you're someone who's like, oh my God, I have to win a state that's actually competitive, like it immediately gets dropped.
Yeah.
And again, like we saw this with Harris, where like that was part of the strategy was like a peace offering towards the crypto industry to try to prevent like them from spending so much money on electing Donald Trump. That's the other thing. They stayed out of the presidential election. Obviously not entirely. People who are like Mark Andreessen is like very pro Donald Trump. But
yeah, the Winklevi were making their big illegal donations, which immediately got refunded to them after they got their headlines.
But like the big crypto PAC stayed out of the presidential election. Like that's not a guarantee in 2028. That's the strategy they took this time. That might not be the strategy they take 4 years from now. And I think if you're JD Vance, for example, who's going to be presumably the Republican nominee for president in 2028, it might be Trump Jr. If you're JD Vance, like
it might be Donald Trump. Let's be real.
Hey,
it's changing some rules.
I can run on. Do you say like, hey, if I make enough overtures to the crypto industry as vice president, like they'll back me with a very ridiculous amount of money.
And Peter Thiel is deep in crypto, so it's not even hard for him to like find the connections and make that
absolutely.
look convincing.
They're right there. And so I think that this election was a lot about like the crypto entering space as like entrenched business interest more so than ever before.
Well, and I think what you said there about how this election it was bipartisan, but that may not be true in the future, is something we may see very strongly in like 2026 in the midterms, especially if they're worried that like the anti-incumbency narrative becomes like corruption, fraud, the things that are easy to tie on Donald Trump in that way. I can imagine the crypto industry wanting to prevent things from swinging the other way. And so I think it's quite plausible we'll see them deploy way more to Republicans and stuff like that to keep that. Because you were even alluding to earlier in this conversation, there were people who, when they saw a fair shake helped get 2 Democrats elected, they were like, oh, maybe that was a bad idea. Maybe it's better actually to have all from one party, which is categorically against regulations. Maybe that'll be cleaner.
Right. I was like Gallego and Slotkin, as much as any other person, like owe their victory to crypto donations. Those elections were just so tight that you could point to anything that they did that would have lost them votes could have doomed them. And if you're like in Pennsylvania, the Democratic senator lost. If you're that, are you like looking at this like, if only I was like Slotkin, if only they had given me more money, maybe I could have won. Maybe I could have pulled this one over. And conversely, but like you said, conversely, if you were the donors, you said you feel like I was the deciding factor. I got 2 sitting U.S. senators elected. Maybe next time I should decide the other way. And like that can be dangerous. I think that they're likely to try to keep this as bipartisan as possible for the next like 2 years. But it's possible. Like the other thing is the Senate math, and now we're getting like way too much in. In 2026, I believe the Democrats could, and if you asked me to bet right now, I would say they're likely to regain control of the House. That's just how like anti-incumbency bias. Democrats tend to do better in off-year elections nowadays. But the Senate map
Republicans are bad at governing.
People are going to be reminded, wait a minute, I didn't like Donald Trump.
Wait, that's what I voted for? I remember him now. He was on TV years ago.
But the Senate math is like very brutal. Like the Democrats have to defend very close seats in Georgia and Michigan, and they only have a couple states where you could plausibly like win, like North Carolina. And so it's possible if I was a crypto PAC, I would be very interested in this idea that you could like maintain the Republican Senate majority pretty easily. And if you lost control of the House, like, well, you'd still have 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And so I would not be surprised. And like you said, they're already raising money. I want to stress again that this is like, there are lots of super PACs that spend a ton of money. On the scale of super PACs that spend a ton of money, this is up there. This is not like, haha, this is like the money that the American Petroleum Institute throws into races.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to add, we should wrap this conversation up soon probably, but like the other thing that always strikes me is that in many senses, the best regulation for the cryptocurrency industry, at least they believe, is effectively no regulation. And so like these cryptocurrency PACs and things like that are incentivized to like split the House and the Senate, split the House and the presidency, like create situations where legislation, regulations, things like that are divisive, can't be advanced, coalitions can't be built because their goal is for nothing to happen. The longer nothing happens, the longer they get to grow unfettered and take advantage of more people. And so like that makes like the metagame of their political donations like darker in a certain sense than like other industries which are trying to capture and get favorable regulations.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like we have in the United States, this is like a core problem where this is like you as president, it's rare to get a trifecta. Joe Biden had a very, very, very thin governing majority when he was first elected and managed to do a ton with it relative to the size of the governing majority. The amount of spending in like the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Especially considering Mansion and Cinema.
Especially considering Mansion and Cinema. But if you're like, oh, well, all that needs to get, there like Mansion's gone. We're talking about these nominees, who maybe should have mentioned this earlier, but like most of these nominees for the economic positions are going to go through pretty easily. It's kind of amazing that like Bessent is going to go through easily. But like people don't believe that RFK Jr. can be torpedoed because you need to peel off 5 Republicans, and you're like, okay, you start counting senators, and you can't find like any.
Pence is trying. It's a little bit hilarious to me that like right now one of the people trying hardest to torpedo RFK Jr. is Mike Pence, the former president's vice P. Yeah, because RFK Jr. has historically been too liberal on abortion. And so Pence is running hardline like to all the pro-life senators to try to get them to defect from RFK Jr.
That's really funny. I never heard of that. Let them fight on that one. But like RFK has very like crazy dangerous ideas on what should be normally bipartisan issues. You can't do that. And like, or even Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of national intelligence. Like she's a former Democrat. She poses this giant security risk. She has been friends with like Putin and Assad and whatever. You think that you could like find 5 Republicans that would be like, I don't know about this one, but it's really tough. And so in a world in which, Republicans control the Senate, cabinet appointees are like checkbox unless they've committed like horrible sexual assault, and even then. And
yes, because we just said we can't torpedo RFK.
We can't torpedo RFK. Hegseth is possibly going to get the nomination for Department of Defense. But I was just saying, Gates was the one person so far who's been nuked. But like a world in which Republicans control the Senate, you can appoint whoever you want to executive positions in the judiciary, but Democrats control the House, and therefore you can't actually pass any like legislation that meaningfully does anything. Is like one in which, like to your point, there'd be a lot of, you could appoint friendly regulators. Nobody's going to write a law in Congress. They'll hold some hearings in the House that would be annoying, and like that's a good outcome for a lot of like the if I was to say like closing remark is like crypto people feel really happy about how this election went, and like the executives especially, and that's very tough.
I fully agree with all of that. We have a crypto executive right here, and all she's been saying is how happy she is that Cas coin is going to be possibly a new central bank digital currency for the upcoming administration. So yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate and fair description of how the entire cryptocurrency community has been feeling since the Trump election. I think you can just look at the price of Bitcoin and probably figure that out.